Most people see grease under a fingernail and think, Janitor. They don't see the wiretap I just spliced into the main fiber line. They don't hear the hum of a 0-day exploit waking up from a 10-year sleep. Crack. The sunflower seed shell split between my teeth. I worked the kernel out with my tongue and spat the husk into the dust. Plateau. 110 degrees in the shade. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer like a bad monitor connection. I was lying on my back under the base of Tower 3, my knees drawn up, my head resting on a coil of spare coax cable. To anyone walking by, I was just another lazy maintenance contractor dodging the sun. But my hands were busy. The fiber optic stripper felt slick in my sweating palm. I isolated the blue data strand, the one carrying the live feed from the VIP firing line. It was delicate work. Surgical. One nick in the glass core and the building management system would scream an alarm, but I didn't nick it. I never did. I clamped the vamp tap onto the line. A tiny leech of black plastic, no bigger than a beetle. A single red LED blinked once on the device, then died. Good. The tap was active, dark, and hungry. It was now feeding a ghost signal into the main server, looping the camera feed from 10 minutes ago. In the eyes of the system, this sector was empty. In reality, I was right here, and Admiral Kane was 12 minutes out. I wiped my hands on my orange safety vest. It was already stained with CLP oil and rust. A perfect camouflage. In a place like Fort Davidson, filth was an invisibility cloak. Officers didn't look at dirt. They looked through it. Hey, you, grease monkey. I didn't flinch. I let the beat hang for 2 seconds. The reaction time of someone who was paid by the hour, not the mission. Then I slid out from under the tower framing. 2 lieutenants stood over me. Crisp uniforms, polished boots, sunglasses, reflecting my own messy hair back at me. They weren't looking at my face. They were looking at the patch on my chest that said, Facilities. Sir? I said. My voice was flat. Bored. The perfect pitch of indifference. Admiral's motorcade is passing the main gate. The taller one said. He kicked the toe of my boot. Not hard, but with enough entitlement to annoy. Clear this junk out. If Kane sees a rat's nest of cable on his inspection route, he'll have your contract pulled. AT, hydraulics check? Sir? I lied, gesturing vaguely at the conduit box. Heat is expanding the fluid lines. If I don't bleed the valve, the pressure sensors will trip. It was gibberish. Tower 3 didn't have hydraulic lines. It was purely electrical. But I used the words pressure and sensors. To a logistics officer, those were magic words that meant, not my problem. The lieutenant sneered. Just get it done. And tuck your shirt in. You look like a bag of smashed crabs. They walked away. Their boots crunched on the gravel, fading toward the VIP line. I watched them go. Strike 1. They hadn't checked my ID badge. It was clipped to my belt. Backwards. If they had turned it over, they would have seen the clearance level didn't match the sector. Strike 2. They didn't check the work order. Strike 3. They kicked a technician who was working on pressure lines. If I had been a saboteur, that kick could have been the detonator. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the cool, smooth metal of the Zippo lighter. My father's lighter. I didn't pull it out. Not yet. I just traced the engraving with my thumb. David Cross. Amateur, I whispered. I crawled back under the tower. Not to work, but to retrieve my burner phone. I thumbed the screen. The signal from the vamp tap was strong. The camera feed on my screen showed the VIP firing line. Empty, distinct, high definition. And in the corner of the screen, a small icon pulsed. Upload complete. The drone I'd planted on the roof of the server building was now synced with the camera feed. Tower 4. Himora, are you seeing this? No reply. Just the steady stream of data. The ledger was open. A low rumble vibrated through the ground, travelling up through the steel frame of the tower and into my spine. Heavy engines. Diesel? I looked out through the mesh grating. A cloud of dust rose in the east. Black SUVs. Flags snapping on the lead vehicle. Admiral Kane. He was early. Of course he was. He was the kind of man who thought punctuality was a weapon. He probably thought he was catching the base off guard. He was wrong. I was the one catching him. I grabbed a handful of sunflower seeds from my pocket and shoved them into my mouth. Crack. Split. Spit. I stood up, dusting off my knees. I adjusted the heavy tool belt, feeling the weight of the wire cutters and the voltage tester. They weren't weapons, technically. But in the next 45 minutes, I was going to use them to tear this man's reputation down to the studs. The lead SUV ground to a halt 50 yards away. The door opened. A boot hit the dirt, polished to a mirror shine. Despite the dust, Admiral Victor Kane stepped out. He adjusted his cap, scanned the horizon, and frowned. He looked exactly like a target. I picked up my toolbox and started walking toward him. The janitor was clocking out. The auditor was clocking in. The gravel crunched. It wasn't the scuff of enlisted boots. It was the heavy, rhythmic grind of authority. Expensive leather, chewing into hot stones with a sound like breaking bones. I stayed on my knees. I kept my head down. My hands were buried in the range control box, slick with hydraulic fluid. To the casual observer, I was a technician servicing wiring. To the trained eye, I was just a grease stain on the pristine concrete of the VIP firing line. Admiral, on deck. A young voice barked. Junior aide. Eager to justify his paycheck. I didn't look up. I tightened a screw that didn't need tightening. Then I loosened it and tightened it again. Invisible work. The footsteps stopped 3 feet from my head. I could smell the polish on the boots. It cut through the thick scent of dust and CLP gun oil. A sharp, chemical smell of perfection that burned the back of my throat. What is this? The voice came from above. Low, resonant, and absolutely terrifying. Admiral Victor Kane. Facilities. Sir. Lieutenant Brooks answered. His voice was oily, smooth. Routine maintenance on the target relay. Apparently, they can't schedule these things around VIP visits. Oh, I didn't ask who it was. Brooks. I asked what it is doing next to my rifle. Silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that only exists when a 3-star admiral decides to stop breathing. I felt the heat of the sun on the back of my neck. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the Nevada sun was a physical weight, pressing me into the ground. Stand up, Kane said. I wiped my hands on my pants, slowly adding another layer of grime to the orange fabric, and stood. I kept my eyes on his chest. It was safer there. Admiral Kane was wearing his service dress whites. Despite the heat, the ribbons on his chest were a colourful mosaic of campaigns I had only read about in redacted files. Enough medals to anchor a battleship. Sir, I mumbled. Shoulders slumped, mouth hanging open just a fraction. The universal posture of the hourly wage worker. Kane stepped closer, taller than on the news. His face, a map of deep lines, etched by decades of command. His eyes, pale blue, cold, and currently locked on my hands. You're greasy, he said. Not an insult. En observation? A tactical assessment of a foreign object in his clean world. Hydraulic leak. Sir. Just patching it up. Kane turned slowly to the rifle on the bench behind him. An M110 SAS. Knight's armament. 7.6, 2mm. Sitting on a bipod, perfectly levelled. Did you touch it? No? On sire? You're lying. Oh, he stepped past me with the terrifying grace of an aging predator. He ran a gloved finger along the edge of the shooting bench. Held it up. A faint smudge of oil. Vibration, Kane said softly. Do you know what vibration does to a precision optic? Soldier. I'm a contractor. Sir. I don't care if you're the Pope. Kane snapped. The intensity flared like a furnace door opening. You were hammering on that box. Vibrations travel through concrete. Up the bench legs. Into the scope rings. Andre, somewhere to my left. Now soft snick. I glanced over. Lieutenant Brooks holding his phone up. Recording. His lip curled in a sneer. Younger officers smirking. Watched the Admiral dress down the janitor. The red recording light felt like a laser sight on my forehead. Heat crawled up my throat. Tell him. The thought was a shard of glass. Tell him you know the DOPE better than he does. Tell him the barrel harmonics are off. I bit my cheek until I tasted copper. The pain grounded me. Reminded me of the mission. The audit. I spent 4 hours calibrating this weapon. Kane said. Humidity, pressure, spindrift. And you just undid it with a $5 wrench. I didn't touch the gun. Sir? My voice small. Pathetic. Perfect. I'm sorry. Sir. I'll leave. You're damn right you will. Get your gear. If I see you near a precision instrument again, your contract is shredded. Yes? Sir. Ein Intel. I knelt down. Didn't hurry. Hurrying looked guilty. I gathered my tools. Wrench. Screwdriver. Cutters. Dropped them into the bag. Clank. Clank. Kane sail. A sound of immense exhaustion. And turned his back. Brooks? Spotting scope. Yes. Admiral. Brooks shoved his phone away and scrambled to the scope. I slung the heavy bag over my shoulder, boots scuffing the gravel away from the line. Scuff? Scuff. Laughter followed me. Low. Suppressed. I reached the shade of the control overhang and turned. From here, the janitor mask slipped away. I pulled out a handful of sunflower seeds. Crack. Sharp. Dry. I worked the shell open, extracted the kernel, and spat the husk onto the concrete. Dough. Kane settled into position. Good posture. Solid. He adjusted the windage turret. Click, click, click. 3 left. I narrowed my eyes at the long, shimmering lane. The Mirage. To the untrained eye. Heat blur. To me, a weather map. Kane was reading the flags at 400 yards. Limp. Dead calm. But at 800, the air was boiling. Mirage flowing right to left. Fast. A hidden thermal draft. He had dialed left. Should have dialed right. He's reading the flags, I whispered. The Zippo felt cold against my leg. He's not reading the light. Kane exhaled. Finger tightened on the trigger. He was going to miss. And I would be right here to pick up the pieces. 3 shots. 3 holes in the dirt. The first shot shattered the afternoon silence, like a hammer strike against a sheet of tin. Crack thump. The recoil rippled through Admiral Kane's shoulder, a spasm of kinetic energy that looked perfect from 20 yards back. I waited for the answering ring of steel. The satisfying clang that meant a bullet had met the target at 800 meters. Silence. Nothing but the dry hiss of the desert wind. Through the spotting scope, I saw a puff of dust kick up 3 feet to the left of the steel silhouette. A clean miss. Kane didn't flinch. He worked the bolt. Clack, clack. The brass casing tumbled onto the concrete, spinning and chiming like a dropped coin. He settled again. Exhaled. Fired. Crack thump. Dust. Left again. He fired a 3rd time. Faster now. Frustration bleeding into his trigger discipline. The result was the same. The target remained pristine, mocking him from half a mile away. The silence that followed the 3rd shot wasn't just heavy. It was dead. It was the sound of a reputation bleeding out on hot asphalt. The windage is off, Kane announced. He didn't look at the target. He looked at the rifle, betraying it before it could betray him. Scope's drifting. I told the armourer this mount was loose. Yes, Admiral. Lieutenant Brooks chirped instantly. He was sweating, his face slick and shiny in the heat. We'll have the armory re-zero it immediately. Probably heat expansion on the rail. I chewed the sunflower seed in my cheek. Crack. They were looking at the hardware. They should have been looking at the air. I watched the range flags. At 400 meters, they were hanging limp, suggesting a dead calm. That's what Kane saw. That's what the ballistics computer said. But I wasn't looking at the flags. I was looking at the boil. The Mirage. Through the shimmering heat waves rising off the valley floor, the air wasn't just vibrating. It was flowing. A river of translucent fluid moving fast from right to left, pushed by a thermal draft channeling through the canyon cut. The Mirage never lied. The flags were political. They showed you what they wanted you to see. The heat showed you the physics. It's not the mount, I said. The words hung in the air, unauthorized and sharp. Brooks spun around, squinting into the shadow of the overhang where I stood. Kane turned slower, his expression hardening into something brittle. Excuse me, Kane said. The wind, I said. My voice was flat, stripped of apology. It's reversing at 600 meters. The flags are dead, but the Mirage is running right to left. You're holding for 0, but the air is pushing 3 minutes left. In 1, Brooks let out a short, incredulous laugh. The janitor is a meteorologist now, or maybe a sniper instructor. He stepped forward, his hand dropping to his belt, a reflexive gesture of authority. You were ordered to leave. Contractor. Get moving before I have the MPs drag you out. Kane didn't laugh. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. He was a shooter. He knew the terms. Mirage. Hold. Minute. Hearing them come out of the mouth of a grease-stained maintenance worker was like hearing a dog recite Shakespeare. It didn't make sense. But you had to pay attention. Boiling air? Kane muttered. You're reading the boil. It's running fast. Sir. If you don't compensate, you'll miss left all day. I stepped out of the shade. The sun hit me like a physical blow, heating the oil stains on my vest. I didn't look at Brooks. I locked eyes with Kane. Let me check the calibration. I said, You want to shoot my rifle? Kane asked. The tone wasn't angry anymore. It was dangerously quiet. 1 round. I said, If I miss, I turn in my badge. I walk off this base, and you save the contractor fee. I disappear. I let the offer sit there. No money. No barbiet. Just a professional wager. My livelihood against his skepticism. But if I hit, I continued, then the rifle isn't broken. And you're going to need someone to fix the 0. Kane looked at Brooks, then back to me. He saw the grease under my fingernails. He saw the cheap tool belt, but he also saw that I wasn't shaking. He stepped back from the bench. A silent challenge. Prove it or die. I walked to the shooting mat. I knelt down. The concrete burned through the knees of my work pants. I reached out and laid my hand on the M110. The polymer stock was hot from the sun. The steel receiver radiating a latent, dangerous heat against my palm. It felt heavy. It felt like truth. I settled onto the shooting mat. The concrete beneath the canvas was hot enough to bake bread, radiating a dry, dusty heat into my stomach. But I pushed it away. I pushed away the murmurs of the officers, the sneer on Brooks' face, and the burning weight of Admiral Kane's stare. I pulled the M110 into my shoulder. The stock was solid, heavy, a dead weight against my collarbone. I rested my cheek on the adjustable comb. It smelled of polymer and old sweat. Familiar. Grounding. My world shrank down to a 3-inch circle of glass. Cold bore. I thought, the first shot from a cold barrel always behaves differently. The metal is contracted. The oil is viscous. The bullet will fly slightly high and slightly left. It's not a defect. It's physics. Most shooters forget it. They trust the 0 from a warm day on a clean range. I didn't trust the 0. I trusted the physics. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the pulse in my neck against the stock. Slow it down. Admiral, this is highly irregular. Brooks barked, stepping forward. His voice was high, irritating. She's a civilian contractor. If she damages government property or hurts someone, the liability alone... Silence. Kane said, I opened my eyes and looked through the scope. The magnification brought the 800-yard target rushing toward me. It was a steel silhouette, painted white, scarred by previous hits, but clean today. I shifted focus. Not at the target. At the air between us. The Mirage was screaming. To the naked eye, it was just shimmer. Through the high-quality glass, it was a river of boiling, transparent fluid. The flags at the firing line were drooping, lazy, and lying. But out there, at the apex of the bullet's flight path, the heat waves were flowing hard from right to left. Fast? A hidden thermal shear coming off the canyon wall. Flags say hold left. I whispered, my lips barely moving. Mirage says hold right. I reached up to the windage turret. The metal knob was hot to the touch. Click, click, click. 3 clicks, right? Against the flags. Against common sense. Then I reached for the elevation turret. Cold bore compensation. 1 click down. 1 click right. Click, click. The sound was tiny, precise. A mechanical heartbeat in the silence. I settled my hand back on the grip. My finger found the trigger guard, tracing the metal curve before resting on the trigger itself. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. I filled my lungs, expanding my diaphragm against the hot ground. Hold. 2, 3, 4. The reticle stopped dancing. The crosshairs settled on the center of the white steel mass. The world went still. The heat, the smell of CLP oil, the pressure of the moment, it all crystallized into a single point of focus. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. I let the breath out slowly, emptying my lungs until I hit the respiratory pause. The natural silence of the body. I applied pressure. Straight back. Steady. The trigger on an M110 is a 2-stage mechanism. I took up the slack. I hit the wall. A pound of resistance between me and the truth. I didn't pull. I squeezed. Like breaking a thin glass rod. Crack. The rifle bucked against my shoulder. A sharp, violent shove. The muzzle blast kicked up a cloud of dust, momentarily obscuring the scope. A brass casing spun through the air, flashing in the sun, and chimed against the concrete. Clink-tink. I didn't blink. I kept my eye on the scope, waiting for the dust to clear, waiting for the bullet to cover the half-mile distance. It takes time. Halon. Agonizing second, where gravity and wind judge your math. Thwag. The sound came back faint but distinct. The sound of copper jacket meeting hardened steel. The dust settled. In the center of the white silhouette, a grey smudge appeared. Dead center. A perfect hit. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent round, and engaged the safety. Click. I stood up, brushing the dust from my knees. The silence on the firing line was total. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a predator realizing something has changed in the food chain. I looked at Kane. His face wasn't angry anymore. It was pale. His eyes flicked from the target to the rifle, and then to me. He was calculating. He realized that a janitor who understands ballistics better than an admiral is not a janitor. She is a security breach. EMPS. Kane said. His voice was low, dangerous. Secure that weapon and check her ID. Now. Oh, the holding room smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a small, windowless box behind the control center, chilled to a meat locker temperature that made the sweat on my back turn to ice. 2 military police officers stood by the door, hands hovering near their holsters. They weren't looking at me like I was a janitor anymore. They were looking at me like I was a bomb. The door swung open. Admiral Kane marched in, sucking the remaining oxygen out of the room. Lieutenant Brooks followed, clutching a clipboard like a shield, a nervous sheen of sweat on his upper lip. "Who are you?" Kane demanded. His voice wasn't the projecting baritone of the parade ground. It was the tight, dangerous growl of a commander who had just been embarrassed in front of his staff. "I just ran your contractor ID. It's a ghost file. Fake name. Fake company. Dot." He stepped into my personal space. I could see the veins pulsing in his temple. "You walk onto my base, tamper with my equipment, and fire a weapon without authorization. That is a federal crime. Soldier, I can have you in Leavenworth before the sun goes down." I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I slowly peeled off my work gloves. The Velcro tore with a sound like ripping canvas. Zip. Loud in the small room. I dropped the gloves on the floor. My hands were still stained with grease, but the movement was deliberate. "Surgical. You can try," I said. Kane blinked. He wasn't used to eye contact from the help. "Excuse me. You can try to send me to Leavenworth," I said. My voice dropped an octave. I shed the bored worker accent like a heavy coat, revealing the steel underneath. "But the paperwork will never clear, because I don't work for facilities. Admiral. And I'm not here to fix the plumbing." Brooks let out a nervous, arrogant scoff. "She's delusional. Sir. A mental case. Probably off her meds. We should just... Quiet," Kane snapped. Without looking at him. His eyes were locked on mine. He was sensing it now. The predator's instinct. He realized he wasn't looking at prey. I reached into my pocket. The MPs tensed, hands dropping to their weapons. "Easy," I whispered. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a small, heavy object. I held it over the metal interrogation table. A circle of blackened brass, worn smooth by years of worry and war. I opened my hand. Sword. The coin hit the metal surface. It didn't bounce. It didn't spin or chime. It landed with a dead, heavy impact. The sound of a gavel ending a trial. Kane looked down. He saw the insignia. The red cell skull. The Latin inscription that didn't promise glory, but threatened accountability. The reaction was visceral. The blood drained from Kane's face so fast, it looked like a magic trick. His pupils constricted to pinpricks. He knew what that coin meant. It meant he hadn't just failed an inspection. It meant he had been compromised. Totally. Completely. For 3 seconds, the only sound in the room was the low, steady hum of the HVAC unit. Then Kane looked up. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the cold, terrifying clarity of survival. "Clear the room," Kane whispered. The MPs hesitated. "Sir." I said. Clear the room. Kane turned on them. His voice a lash. Out. Now. Post a guard at the end of the hall. No one comes in. No one. The MPs scrambled out. The door clicked shut. Only 3 of us remained. Me, Kane, and Brooks, who was staring at the coin with the confusion of a man watching a car crash in slow motion. Kane looked at me. He didn't salute. This wasn't a movie. He looked at me with the wariness of a man locked in a cage with a tiger. Red cell, Kane said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. How long have you been inside? Since 0600. I said. I tapped your comms. I mapped your grid. I watched you eat breakfast. What do you want? I want you to listen. I said. I leaned forward, resting my grease-stained hands on his pristine table. This isn't a drill. Victor, your base hasn't just been penetrated by me. It's been penetrated by code. I nodded at the wall. Towards the server room. The BMS is compromised. The temperature in the server room is rising. Someone is running a 0-day exploit to burn your logs. And unless we stop it, in 10 minutes, this building becomes a coffin. I paused, letting the threat settle. David Cross sends his regards. Kane froze. He knew the name. He knew the legacy. And he knew that the bill had finally come due. What is happening? Kane asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes were darting around the room, searching for an enemy he couldn't see. I didn't answer him. Not with words. I raised a grease-stained finger and pointed at the main wall of monitors. Specifically, the building management system readout in the center. Listen, I whispered. For a heartbeat, there was only the hum of the facility. The low-frequency vibration of the massive industrial HVAC units that kept the server farm chilled to a precise 60 degrees. It was a sound so constant, you forgot it was there. Until it stopped. Where? Kachunk. The heavy thrum of the compressors died. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was violent. It sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of a heart stopping. On the BMS screen, the digital temperature readout for the server room began to twitch. 65 degrees. 68. 72. The numbers flickered from green to amber. Then, slowly, inevitably, they turned red. The cooling is off, Kane said. Stepping closer to the screen. Why is the cooling off? It's not just off, I said. It's reversed. They've shut the intake vents and opened the heat exchange loop. They aren't just letting the servers get warm. Victor, they're cooking them. Kane turned on Lieutenant Brooks. Get facilities on the line. Override the HVAC manually. Brooks fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the receiver. I can't. Sir, the system is locked out. It says maintenance mode. Ari, it's a kinetic exploit. I explained, my voice cutting through Brooks's panic. They didn't hack the firewall to steal data. That takes too long. They hacked the environment. Overload the HVAC. Spike the temperature. I walked over to the glass partition that separated our control room from the server room below. Down there, inside the fishbowl, A dozen technicians were working at their terminals. They were looking up at the vents, confused. One of them tugged at his collar. "What happens when the temperature hits 100 degrees?" I asked, looking at Brooks. Brooks swallowed hard. He looked pale, sickly, in the artificial light. The fire suppression system triggers. Correct, I said. Halon dump, oxygen displacement, and the doors. Fail. Safe. Brooks whispered. Wrong. I snapped. Check the protocol. Lieutenant, this is a level 5 secure facility. 0 day triggered a bio-containment protocol. The system thinks the heat spike is a biological agent release. It flips the locks to fail secure to prevent the spread of pathogens. It seals the room. I pointed down at the technicians. They aren't protecting the data. Brooks, they're building an oven, and they're locking your men inside it to sanitize the breach. I know, as if on queer. The room turned blood red. Flash. 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 The strobe lights in the ceiling erupted. The emergency lighting washed Kane's face in crimson, making him look like a casualty of war. Then came the sound. Voop, 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 voop. The alarm was deafening. A rhythmic, piercing shriek, designed to induce panic. Down in the server room, the confusion turned to terror. I saw a technician run to the main exit. He slammed his hand against the crash bar. Nothing. He threw his shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. It was held fast by 1,200 pounds of magnetic force. He turned to the glass. His face contorted in a silent scream. He pounded on the window. Thump, thump, thump. I turned to Brooks. He was backed against the wall, clutching his clipboard like a shield. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. You gave them the access codes. No, Brooks squeaked. They said it was a reboot. They said they just needed to wipe the logs. No one was supposed to get hurt. And, you idiot, I said, you think you're their partner. You're a loose end. Burning the logs means burning the people who witnessed the crime. That includes them. I pointed at the men trapped in the glass box. And it includes you. Enough? Kane roared. The sound of his command cut through the siren. He lunged for the main console. Override. Computer. Disengaged or locks. Authorization. Kane Alpha 1. End quote. A synthetic voice responded. Cool and indifferent. Access denied. Administrative privileges suspended. Biological hazard containment in progress. Damn it. Kane slammed his fist onto the metal desk. The sound was lost under the wail of the siren. He looked at the screen. 98 degrees. 99. Warning. Halon discharge in T-minus 60 seconds. We have 1 minute. Kane said, turning to me. Can you hack it? Can you bypass the lock? I looked at the keyboard. Not in 60 seconds. Not with a 0 day running the show. The code is rewriting itself faster than I can type. I looked around the room. My eyes landed on the table where the MPs had left the evidence. My tool belt, my Zippo, and the M110 SASS sniper rifle. I walked over to the table. I picked up the rifle. The polymer was still warm from the range. We can't use code. Victor, I said. I racked the bolt, checking the chamber. It was empty. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single 7.62mm cartridge I'd palmed from the firing line earlier. The system is logical, I said. It won't listen to reason. I loaded the round. The bolt slid home with a heavy, metallic clack. So we have to use physics. It started with a sound like a jet engine, igniting underwater. Hiss. The noise was deafening. A pressurized scream that vibrated through the reinforced glass and travelled up through the soles of my boots. Inside the server room, the ceiling nozzles erupted. Thick, white plumes of gas blasted downward, hitting the floor and rolling out like a tsunami of dry ice. It wasn't smoke. It was Halon, 1301, mixed with CO2, fire suppression, oxygen displacement. The air inside the fishbowl turned opaque in seconds. The technicians, who had been staring up in confusion, were suddenly fighting a war against their own environment. I saw a young man in a blue shirt double over, coughing violently, his hands clutching his throat. Another stumbled blindly toward the glass, his eyes wide and red, his mouth opening in a silent scream for air that was rapidly being pushed out of the room. They weren't fighting a fire. They were drowning on dry land. "Open the door," Kane roared. He slammed his fist onto the intercom button, but his voice was lost in the mechanical hiss. "Get out of there. Move." Down in the white fog, the corporal found the emergency exit. He threw his entire body weight against the panic bar. It should have swung open. It didn't. He hit it again. And again. Thump. Thump. The sound was dull. Vet. Muffled by 2 inches of ballistic glass. It was the sound of a coffin lid being nailed shut from the inside. The corporal turned to the window, hammering his fists against the pane. Thump. Thump. He was looking right at us, begging. "Why won't it open?" Kane demanded, turning to me. His face was a mask of helpless rage. "Break the seal. Order the MPs to breach." "Oh, they can't," I said. My voice was cold, detached. I had to be... Panic was a luxury we couldn't afford. "This isn't a malfunction, Victor. It's a feature. 0-day triggered a level 5 bio-containment. It flipped the locks to fail secure." I pointed at the steel frame of the door below. "That's not a mechanical latch. That is 1,200 pounds of electromagnetic force. The system thinks those men are the threat. It's sealing the breach. You could hit that door with a truck, and it wouldn't open. The only way out is to cut the power to the magnets." "Oh, no. Oh, God. No." The whimper came from the corner. Lieutenant Brooks was sliding down the wall, his legs giving out. He was pulling at his collar, his thigh oskel, gasping for breath, as if he were the one in the gas chamber. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Brooks sobbed, but his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an excuse. They lied to me. Tower 4 said it was just a reboot. A remote wipe to clear the logs. Get the insurance money for the servers. No one was supposed to die. He looked up at Kane, his eyes wide, with the terrifying clarity of a coward who realizes he has sold his soul for loose change. and gotten shortchanged. I gave them the codes. Brooks confessed, his voice cracking. Tower 4. They promised me 10%. Just for a reboot schedule. I didn't know. I looked at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the dry, cynical exhaustion of seeing the same story play out for the 1000th time. Greed, stupidity, and the arrogant belief that you could control a monster once you let it out of the cage. You didn't sell them a schedule, Brooks, I said, my voice cutting through his sobbing. You sold them a kill box? Inside the server room, the movement was slowing down. The violent thrashing was turning into sluggish confusion. The CO2 was heavier than air. It was filling the room from the floor up, an invisible tide rising to drown them. The corporal at the door slid down the glass, leaving a long, sweaty streak. He didn't get back up. The white fog swallowed him. They have less than 2 minutes, I said. Before brain damage. 3 minutes before cardiac arrest. Kane was shaking. He looked at the console, then at the dying men, then at his own hands. He was an admiral. He commanded fleets. He controlled airstrikes. But against a line of malicious code, executing a logic loop, he was completely powerless. I can't open it, Kane whispered. I can't stop it. No, I said. You can't. Not with a command. I turned away from the glass. I walked over to the metal table where the M110 SASS lay waiting. The rifle felt heavy, solid, real. It was the only honest thing in the room. I picked it up, feeling the cold polymer against my cheek as I checked the scope. Computers, Lee? I said. I turned back to Kane, holding the weapon across my chest. Physics doesn't give me a clear line of fire. I'm going to open a window. Do it, Kane said. He handed me the M110 SASS. He didn't check the safety. He didn't ask if I was qualified. The weight of the weapon passed between us like a baton, in a relay race where the finish line was survival. For the first time since I walked onto his range, Admiral Victor Kane wasn't looking at a janitor. He wasn't looking at a contractor. He was looking at a soldier. I took the rifle. It was warm, heavy, and smelled of gun oil and burned propellant. A knight's armament, M110. Gas-operated. Semi-automatics. A tool designed for turning math into violence. I racked the bolt, ejecting the live round I had loaded earlier. I caught the brass in mid-air, snatch, and inspected the primer. Clean. No dents. I reloaded it, driving the bolt home with the heel of my hand. The hydraulic control box? I said, my voice low and fast. It's on the north wall of the server room, behind the main rack, near the ceiling. It controls the pressure for the magnetic seals. If I hit the pressure relief valve, the system loses compression. The magnetic locks will default to fail-safe. They'll open. Can you see it? Kane asked, squinting into the swirling white fog below. I looked through the observation glass. The server room was a milk bottle. The Halon gas had filled the space completely. A churning, opaque ocean of white. I couldn't see the server racks. I couldn't see the door frame. I couldn't even see the men dying on the floor anymore. just the relentless, blinding white. "No," I said. "I can't see a damn thing." Oh, I dropped to the floor of the hallway. The linoleum was cold against my stomach. A sharp, shocking contrast to the heat radiating from the rifle barrel. I needed stability. I needed to turn my body into a tripod. I kicked my legs out, digging the toes of my boots into the metal door frame for leverage. I pulled the stock tight into my shoulder pocket, welding my cheek to the polymer comb until the vibration of the building hummed in my jaw. "I need you to be my spotter," I told Kane. "Not for the shot. For the glass." "The glass?" "It's ballistic laminate," I said, reaching up to adjust the parallax knob on the scope. 2 inches thick. Polycarbonate and glass layers, angled at 15 degrees to deflect shrapnel. It's going to do the same thing to my bullet. It will slow it down and deflect it upward. If I aim dead on, I'll hit the ceiling conduit. Oh, I looked through the scope. White. Nothing but granular, shifting white. It was like staring into the center of a cloud. My reticle was floating in a void, hunting for a target that didn't exist in the visible spectrum. "I have to guess the deflection," I whispered, the taste of sunflower salt still on my tongue. "And I have to guess where the box is." Kane knelt beside me. I could hear his breathing. Heavy, ragged. The breathing of a man watching his command disintegrate in real time. "You don't guess?" Kane said. His voice was steady, the only thing anchoring me to reality in the chaos. "You calculate?" "Calculate." I closed my eyes. I shut out the blinding white fog. I shut out the hissing of the gas and the muffled, desperate thumping of the dying men. I went back to 0600 hours. The morning infiltration. I was a janitor then. I was pushing a broom across the server room floor, listening to the hum of the drives. I replayed the memory tape, frame by frame. The smell of ozone and lemon floor wax. The cool draft from the vents. 4 steps from the door to the first rack. Turn left. 6 steps to the north wall. I built the room in my mind. Wire by wire. Board by board. The hydraulic unit is mounted at shoulder height. 5 feet. 8 inches off the ground. It's a grey metal box, roughly 10 inches square, marked with a yellow warning sticker. And next to the sticker, a single status LED. Amber. I placed the racks in the void. I placed the conduits. I placed the box. Now, the physics. Distance, 15 yards. Angle, 15 degrees downward. Glass thickness, 2 inches. The bullet would hit the glass. The laminate would chew at the copper jacket, slowing it from 2,600 feet per second. The angle would push the nose up. Deflection, deviation. Approximately 3 inches at this range. Maybe 3.5. To hit the valve, I had to aim 3 inches low, and I had to aim through a wall of opaque gas at a target that existed only in my memory. I opened my eyes. The white fog was still there, swirling like smoke in a jar. But now, through the soup, I saw it. A faint, pulsating amber glow. It was barely visible, like a distant lighthouse in a heavy fog. But it was there. The status light on the hydraulic unit. "I see it," I whispered. I see the light. I shifted my hips, micro-adjusting the point of aim. The crosshairs settled 3 inches below that tiny amber star. To anyone else, I was aiming at nothing. To me, it was the bullseye. My finger found the trigger. The metal was cool, smooth, unforgiving. The world narrowed down. The alarm siren faded into a dull, rhythmic drone. The panic of the men below became abstract data. There was only the reticle, the breath in my lungs, and the math. "Clear back," I said. Kane moved away. I felt the absence of his shadow. I was alone in the corridor, alone with the physics. My heart rate slowed. Thump, thump, thump. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a savior. I was a mechanics. And I was about to fix a very expensive broken lock with a very loud hammer. I took up the slack on the trigger. Amber light. Aim low. Trust the glass. Inhale. Deep. Filling the diaphragm. Exhale. Slow. Controlled. The respiratory pause. I squeezed. Crack. The sound in the confined hallway was apocalyptic. It wasn't a bang. It was a physical blow to the skull. The muzzle blast slapped the walls, amplifying the report into a concussive wave that punched the air from my lungs. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. Through the scope, I saw the violence of physics. The bullet hit the ballistic glass. The laminate didn't shatter. It cratered. A spiderweb of white fractures erupted outward from the impact point, instantly frosting the window like ice spreading on a pond. But the center, the hole, was clear. The bullet punched through, distorted, slowed, stripped of its copper jacket, but still traveling at 2,000 feet per second. It plunged into the white fog of the server room, screaming toward the invisible wall. I didn't see it hit. I didn't have to. Klang hiss. The sound came a split second later. A heavy, metallic rupture from deep within the fog. It sounded like an iron lung exhaling. A vit, tearing noise of pressurized fluid escaping. Then, a mechanical groan. Kahunk. The heavy steel door to the server room shuddered. The magnetic seal, starved of its hydraulic pressure, disengaged. The 1,200 pounds of holding force vanished in an instant. The door popped open a few inches. A thick, white tongue of CO2 gas licked out into the hallway, curling around the doorframe like escaping steam. It was freezing cold, smelling of chemical propellant. It worked. The failsafe kicked in. The system, sensing a catastrophic loss of hydraulic pressure, defaulted to the only safe state it knew. Open. The door swung wieder. Pushed by the positive pressure of the gas, a figure stumbled out of the fog. The young corporal. He fell to his knees in the hallway, retching, gasping for the clean air, his uniform soaked in condensation. Then another technician, and another. They crawled out of the kill box, coughing, their faces red and wet, dragging each other into the light. They were alive. I watched them for a second, my fingers still on the trigger guard. The tension in my chest uncoiled. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Movement to my right. Lieutenant Brooks was edging toward the exit. his eyes darting to the stairwell. He thought the chaos was his cover. He thought he could slip away in the smoke. Going somewhere. Lieutenant? Ah? Kane's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. He didn't shout. He just reached out and grabbed Brooks by the collar of his expensive suit, slamming him against the wall with enough force to rattle his teeth. Brooks crumpled, sobbing, his hands raised in surrender. I sat up. I engaged the safety on the rifle. Click. I opened the bolt. The spent brass casing ejected, spinning in the air, catching the red light of the alarm before hitting the linoleum with a bright, clear sound. Cling. I looked at Kane. He was holding Brooks with one hand, but he was looking at me. There was no anger in his eyes now, no arrogance, no question of rank, just the sober, heavy look of a man who knows exactly how close he came to the edge. I stood up, leaving the rifle on the floor. Calibration complete, I said. The adrenaline was gone. It didn't just fade. It crashed. It drained out of me the moment the rifle hit the floor, leaving behind a cold, brittle ache in my bones. My hands didn't shake, but they felt heavy, like lead weights attached to my wrists. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the Nevada desert in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. The air tasted metallic. It smelled of ozone, burnt propellant, and the acrid, chemical tang of the Halon gas drifting from the open doors like a ghost escaping a tomb. I leaned against the hood of my rusted Ford truck, watching the show. It was a good show. The MPs were efficient. They had Lieutenant Brooks in cuffs, marching him toward a waiting van. Brooks wasn't crying anymore. He looked gutted. He just looked empty. A man whose future had been deleted by his own greed. The arrogance that had held him upright an hour ago had evaporated, leaving only a cheap suit and a terrified kid. Admiral Kane walked over. He looked older than he had this morning. The starch was gone from his uniform. His shoulders slumped under the weight of the near miss. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the invisible barrier between officer and enlisted, between client and contractor. "They're alive," Kane said. He didn't look at me. He looked at the ambulance where the young corporal was being treated for oxygen deprivation. "All of them. The medics say they'll be fine." Good," I said, my voice rasping like sandpaper. "You should check their lungs for frostbite. Halon is cold." Kane nodded. He took off his cap and ran a hand through his grey hair. "I misjudged you. Cross. I owe you. Well, I owe you more than an apology. I can write a letter of commendation. I can have a medal authorized. What you did in there..." "Stop," I said. I didn't want his medals. I didn't want his gratitude. Gratitude was a currency that devalued the moment the danger passed. I wanted something that held its value. Something spendable. I reached into the pocket of my grease-stained vest. I pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't formal stationery. It was the back of a range safety checklist, crumpled and folded in quarters. I smoothed it out against the hood of the truck and held it out. "I don't need a medal, Admiral," I said. "I need you to sign this." Kane took the paper. He unfolded it. He read the handwritten scrawl. "Invoice number 001. Consultation fee, $50,000. Services rendered, security audit and crisis mitigation. Payable to Ghost Protocol, LLC. He looked up at me. For a second, I thought he might be offended. Then, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who understands the cost of doing business. 50,000? Kane said. For one bullet. For knowing where to put the bullet. I corrected. And for saving 12 lives? That comes out to about $4,000 a head. I'd say that's a bargain. Okay. Kane pulled a heavy gold pen from his pocket. He didn't hesitate. He signed the bottom of the paper against his palm. Scritch. Scratch. The sound of the expensive nib digging into the dirty paper was sharp and satisfying. He handed it back. Finance will wire it by Friday, he said. Good doing business with you, Victor, I said. I didn't salute. I didn't offer my hand. I folded the invoice and shoved it back into my pocket, right next to the sunflower seeds. I climbed into the truck. The seat was torn, the dashboard cracked by the sun. It was 1,000,000 miles away from the polished leather of Kane's SUV. I turned the key. Krachunk. Cough. Spudder. The engine caught with a rattle that sounded like loose change tumbling in a dryer. The vibration shook the steering wheel under my palms. I pulled my burner phone from the glove box. I needed to check the extract route. There was a new message. It wasn't from the bank. It wasn't from Kane. The sender ID was blocked. I opened it. The screen glowed pale blue in the darkening cab. Cleanse complete. Brooks removed. You remain relevant. My thumb hovered over the screen. Tower 4. They had been watching. The whole time. They knew I would find the tap. They knew I would find the 0 day. They knew I would stop it. They used me. The realization hit me colder than the Halon gas. They used me to clean up their loose end. Brooks was a liability, and I was exactly what my cover said I was. The janitor. They sent me to take out the trash so they wouldn't get their hands dirty. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. I'm not your asset, I whispered to the glowing screen. I powered the phone down. I popped a back cover, pulled the battery, and snapped the SIM card in half. Schnapp. I rolled down the window and tossed the pieces into a rusted oil drum by the gate. Clatter. I put the truck in gear. The headlights cut a yellow path through the gathering dark, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The job was done. The bill was paid. But the debt my father left behind, that was just beginning to accrue interest. I drove into the night, leaving the base, the Admiral, and the ghost of the man I used to be in the rearview mirror.